A Netflix documentary made me realize my entire life was a lie. I was halfway through a new true crime documentary when I saw my father on screen, walking through the background of crime scene footage from 20 years ago. "Dad, you need to see this right now," I called out, pausing the screen on his face. He walked into the living room, and the second he saw himself on TV, his face went white. "Pack your things, Lee. We have 10 minutes before they realize we're blown," he said in a voice I'd never heard him use before. "What are you talking about?" My heart was slamming against my ribs because my boring suburban father was on TV at a murder scene from 20 years ago. He was already yanking photos off the walls and throwing them into the fireplace. My mother came out of her office looking annoyed until she saw his face. "They aired the footage," was all he said, and she immediately ran upstairs. I heard drawers slamming while I stood frozen, watching my dad pour lighter fluid on our family photos. "Stop standing there and get your emergency bag from under your bed," he said. And that's when I noticed the pistol in his hand. My legs felt like water as I ran upstairs and found a bag under my bed that I'd never known was there before, already packed with clothes and cash and a passport with my picture but a different name, Madison Charleston. There were also car keys to a vehicle I didn't recognize and a burner phone still in its packaging. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely zip it back up. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's happening," I said, my voice cracking. My dad looked at his watch and then at my mom, who was suddenly in the doorway with 3 duffel bags. "Your real name is Madison Charleston, and we've been in witness protection since you were 5 years old," he said while the photos curled into black ash. The words didn't make sense, but the weapon in his hand was real, and the terror in my mother's eyes was real, and my entire life was apparently fake. "This can't be real," I said, backing against the wall. "We live in Ohio and you work at State Farm and Mom teaches piano lessons." My dad actually laughed, but it sounded bitter and wrong. "I haven't worked a day at State Farm and your mother hasn't touched a piano since we got here. Those are just the stories we tell people." My mom was stuffing ammunition boxes into one of the duffel bags like this was completely normal. "The piano students who come here are federal agents checking in on us," she said without looking up. My mother's phone rang and she answered in a harsh, guttural language, then switched to English. "Handlers compromised. We're on our own. They killed Tyson an hour ago." My dad swore and pulled a revolver from inside the cereal box. Everything felt like a movie happening to someone else as I watched my suburban dad check the ammunition like he'd done it 1,000 times. "How long until they get here?" he asked my mom. 20 minutes if we're lucky, 5 if we're not," she replied, and then looked at me. "Can you shoot?" I shook my head and she pressed a knife into my hand instead. "Then you carry this and stay between us no matter what happens. Someone leaked that footage on purpose because they've been looking for us," my dad explained while my mom backed the car into the garage. "I testified against the Serbian mob about those murders. They think I died that day with the rest of the Ansel family, but I survived and helped put them in prison. Now they know I'm alive." The documentary was still paused on his face and I wanted to throw up. "But why did you testify?" I asked, and his jaw tightened. "Because I helped them launder money for 5 years and I knew where all the bodies were buried. The law gave me a choice and I chose to keep you safe." My phone started buzzing with texts from my best friend, but my dad grabbed it and snapped it in half, then threw it in the fire. I watched my best friend's messages disappear into flames along with every photo of my fake childhood. Lee Lane was already dead, and I was Madison Charleston now, someone I didn't even know how to be. "Will they hurt my friends?" I asked, suddenly terrified for everyone I knew. "They only want us," my mom said, but she didn't sound completely sure. The doorbell rang and my parents both raised their weapons. "I know you're in there, Wade," a man called out with an accent that made my mom grab my arm hard enough to bruise. "Netflix is amazing, isn't it? My nephew called me 20 minutes ago about the documentary. He recognized you immediately, and then we checked your daughter's Instagram. So many helpful photos with location tags." My stomach dropped because I had posted a picture from our front porch just yesterday. My mom was pulling out a Glock from her purse like it belonged there. The man outside laughed and said something in Serbian to someone else. "Come out and we'll make this quick, or we can burn the house down with you inside like we should have done 20 years ago." My normal Tuesday had turned into a nightmare and I couldn't stop shaking. "How many?" my dad whispered to my mom. She peeked through the blinds and held up 4 fingers, then pointed up and held up 2 more. 6 people had come to kill us. "When I open the garage door, you drive straight through whatever's in front of us," my dad told me, pushing me into the driver's seat even though I'd only had my license for 3 months. And that's when I saw the black SUVs blocking both ends of our street. My dad hit the garage door opener and I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal before the door was even halfway up. The car shot forward and smashed through the bottom half of the door, and I felt wood and metal scraping across the roof and hood as we burst into the driveway. The black SUVs were right there, one blocking the left side of the street and one blocking the right, and I could see men in dark clothes turning toward us with guns in their hands. My dad was yelling at me to turn right now, and my mom twisted in her seat and fired 2 shots out her window toward the SUV on the left. The sound inside the car was so loud it hurt my ears and I screamed but kept my foot on the gas. I cranked the steering wheel as hard as I could to the right, and the car jumped over the curb into our neighbor's front yard. The lawn was soft from yesterday's rain and the car bounced hard, throwing us all against our seatbelts. I could see Mrs. Patterson's garden gnomes in front of me, and I drove straight through them, sending little ceramic pieces flying everywhere. My mom fired another shot, and I heard glass breaking somewhere behind us. My dad was pointing toward the space between two houses where the greenbelt started, and I aimed for it even though there was a white picket fence in the way. Bullets hit the back window and the glass exploded inward, covering the back seat with tiny pieces. I was screaming and crying, but somehow my hands stayed on the wheel and my foot stayed on the gas. The car hit the fence and wood splintered everywhere, and then we were bouncing down a steep slope into the drainage area. The car bottomed out hard and something metal scraped underneath, making a horrible grinding sound. My dad pointed to a concrete tunnel opening and I drove toward it, the car sliding sideways in the mud. We made it maybe 20 feet into the tunnel before the car got stuck on something and the wheels just spun uselessly. My dad yelled for us to get out and run, and I grabbed my emergency bag and threw open the door. The tunnel was dark and smelled like sewage and old water, and I could hear shouting in Serbian coming from behind us. My mom grabbed my arm and pulled me forward into the darkness, and we started running. The knife she had given me was still in my other hand, and I gripped it so hard my fingers hurt. My lungs were burning after just a few seconds because I'm not a runner and I've never been this scared in my entire life. We were splashing through water that came up to our ankles, and it was so dark I couldn't see anything except the tiny flashlight my dad was holding. Behind us, the shouting got louder, and I heard at least 2 different voices echoing through the tunnel. My dad suddenly pulled us sideways into a concrete alcove I hadn't even seen, and we pressed ourselves against the cold, wet wall. I was trying so hard to control my breathing, but my chest was heaving, and I thought for sure they would hear us. My mom had her gun raised toward the tunnel opening we'd just come from, and my dad was covering the other direction with his revolver. The footsteps got closer, and I heard men talking in that harsh language, and then a flashlight beam swept past our hiding spot. I held my breath and squeezed my eyes shut like that would somehow make me invisible. The footsteps passed right by us, so close I could smell cigarette smoke on someone's clothes. The voices moved away down the tunnel and I started to breathe again, but then they came back. The searchers walked past our alcove a second time, and I heard one of them say something that made the others laugh. The water sounds and the echoes seemed to confuse them about exactly where we were hiding. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes, the voices faded away completely. My dad waited another minute, then signaled us to move deeper into the drainage system, away from where the searchers had gone. We walked for what felt like forever through the dark tunnels, taking turns whenever my dad indicated. Finally, we reached a different exit that came out in someone's backyard 6 blocks from our house. We climbed out covered in mud and dirty water, and I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. My mom pulled out the burner phone and made a call, speaking in English this time. She said we needed immediate pickup and our handler was dead, then gave an address I didn't recognize. When she hung up, she told my dad she was going alone to get the backup car from a storage unit, and she'd meet us at the gas station on Miller Road in 20 minutes. My dad tried to argue, but she was already running toward the street. My dad and I hid behind a dumpster at a closed gas station, crouching in the shadows while he kept checking his watch. This was the first moment we'd had to actually breathe since I paused that documentary. I looked at my dad and realized he wasn't the boring insurance agent anymore. He was someone who knew how to run and hide and shoot, and that person had always been there under the surface. His hands were steady on his gun, and his eyes kept scanning the street like he'd done this 1,000 times before. 20 minutes later, my mom pulled up in an old Civic I'd never seen, and we jumped in with our bags. She'd changed into different clothes and had a baseball cap pulled down low over her face. She looked nothing like the woman who taught piano lessons and made cookies for her students last week. As we drove away from our neighborhood, my dad finally started explaining everything. He talked about the Ansel family murders and how he helped the Serbian mob launder money through real estate deals for 5 years. He said there were bodies buried in construction sites around the city, and he kept detailed records of every transaction and every murder he knew about. Those records put 15 people in prison after he testified. I was sitting in the back seat realizing my father was both a criminal and the reason those criminals went to jail. The story he was telling didn't match the dad who helped me with my math homework and took me to soccer practice. I interrupted him and said that my Instagram post from yesterday showed our front porch, and I had the location tag turned on. The silence in the car after I said that was worse than any yelling could have been. I watched my mom's hands get tight on the steering wheel, and my dad closed his eyes like I'd just punched him in the stomach. My mom checked the rearview mirror for the 3rd time in 2 minutes, and her jaw got tight. She told us there was an SUV 3 cars back that had followed us through 4 different turns. My dad twisted around to look, but she snapped at him to face forward because we couldn't let them know we'd spotted them. My stomach dropped because I thought we'd gotten away clean. Mom suddenly cranked the wheel right, and we shot into a shopping center parking lot so fast the tires squealed. She wove between parked cars like she was playing a video game, cutting across empty spots and around light poles. I grabbed the door handle and held on while she aimed for a narrow gap between 2 buildings. The service alley was barely wide enough for our car, and I heard something scrape against the passenger side. We burst out onto a different street, and Mom floored it, checking the mirror again. The SUV tried to follow us into the alley, but it was too wide and got stuck between the buildings. I looked back and saw it reversing while the driver's door opened. We merged onto the highway and immediately hit stop traffic. Cars were packed bumper to bumper and nobody was moving. Mom didn't even slow down. She jerked the wheel and drove onto the shoulder, squeezing between the concrete barrier and the line of cars. Our side mirror hit the barrier and exploded into pieces of glass and plastic. The grinding sound made my teeth hurt. I looked out my window and saw angry drivers yelling at us as we passed. Then I saw the SUV again 2 lanes over, stuck in the same traffic we were bypassing. The driver had his phone pressed to his ear and his mouth was moving fast. My dad said they were calling the others to coordinate and we needed to get off this highway now. Mom took the next exit doing 50 miles per hour and the car tilted sideways. I thought we were going to flip, but somehow the tires held. My dad pulled out the burner phone and dialed a number with shaking fingers. He asked for the U.S. and Marshals Service duty line and then said something that sounded like a password. The words came out smooth like he'd practiced them 1,000 times. He explained that their witness protection family was blown and handler Tyson was dead, and they needed immediate help. A woman's voice came through the speaker asking him to verify his identity code. He rattled off numbers and letters while Mom took random turns through a residential neighborhood. The woman said her name was Marshal Nora Lee, and she would call back in 5 minutes after verification. The phone went dead and my dad stared at it like he could make it ring faster. Mom pulled into a gas station and the car finally stopped moving. My hands were cramping from holding the door handle so tight. Mom reached into the back seat and shoved a hoodie at me, then handed me a pair of sunglasses even though the sun was setting. She told me to put them on right now and keep my head down. My dad got out to pump gas and I watched him scan every person at the other pumps. His hand stayed near his waistband where I knew he had the gun tucked. A woman walked past our car and my dad's whole body tensed until she got in her own vehicle and drove away. I realized we couldn't use credit cards or debit cards or anything that would show up in a computer somewhere. We couldn't call anyone or check social media or do any of the normal things that left digital footprints. We were completely disconnected from the world I knew. The burner phone rang and my dad answered it before the first ring finished. Marshal Nora Lee gave him an address for a library in the next town. She said we needed to meet her there in 40 minutes. She told him to vary his speed and take different routes, and if he spotted another tail, he should abort and call her with a new meeting point. My dad repeated the address back to her twice to make sure he had it right. When he hung up, he programmed the address into an old GPS unit from the glove box instead of using a phone. Mom finished pumping gas and paid cash inside while my dad and I sat in the car watching every vehicle that pulled in. A black sedan parked 3 spaces away, and my dad's hand moved to his gun until a family with little kids got out. I was seeing threats everywhere now, and I hated it. During the drive, Mom started talking without looking at either of us. She said she was never actually a piano teacher before witness protection. Those weekly students who came to our house were federal agents doing check-ins disguised as lessons. She used to work in private security overseas, which is why she knew how to shoot and speak Serbian and drive like we were in an action movie. My dad added that they met on a protection detail in Eastern Europe, and that was the only true thing about their relationship we'd ever been told. Every single story about how they met and fell in love was fake. Every anniversary celebration was based on a lie. I sat in the back seat realizing I didn't actually know my parents at all. The people I'd lived with for 17 years were strangers wearing my parents' faces. We reached the library parking lot exactly 40 minutes after the call. A plain gray sedan was parked near the entrance with someone sitting in the driver's seat. My dad told us to stay in the car while he approached alone. He walked slowly with his hands visible and stopped a few feet from the sedan. A black woman in her 40s got out wearing a blazer and khaki pants. She looked like a teacher or a businesswoman. Nothing like what I expected a U.S. Marshal to look like. She asked my dad something and he started reciting details that sounded like dates and places and names. She nodded and gestured for us to join them. Up close, I could see she had gray streaks in her hair and tired eyes. She introduced herself as Marshal Nora Lee and shook hands with my mom. Then she looked at me and said, "I must be Madison." Hearing my real name out loud from a stranger made me feel dizzy. Nora told us handler Tyson was found shot in his apartment 3 hours ago. 2 bullets to the head, execution style. She said it looked professional and the crime scene was clean. Nora explained that someone inside the documentary production company leaked information about the footage before it aired. The mob had time to prepare and coordinate the attack on our house. She said the Marshals Service was investigating the leak, but right now her only priority was keeping us alive. She needed us to follow her to a temporary safe house while they figured out next steps. My dad asked how long we'd have to stay there and she said she didn't know yet. Everything depended on what the investigation turned up and whether they caught the people hunting us. She told us to get our bags and transfer them to her sedan. My dad hesitated and I saw him touch the gun under his jacket. Nora's eyes tracked the movement and her expression hardened. She told him he needed to surrender the weapon before they went any further. My dad said absolutely not, and his voice got loud. He argued that the gun was the only thing keeping us alive and he wasn't giving it up to anyone. Nora said she couldn't transport armed civilians and it was against policy. They went back and forth getting angrier, and I saw my mom step between them. She pointed out that Nora was literally our only lifeline right now, and we couldn't afford to lose federal protection over a gun. My dad looked at her like she'd betrayed him. Then I heard my own voice saying we should trust her because we didn't have any other options. Both my parents turned to stare at me. I said the mob had already found us once and they'd find us again if we tried to run on our own. At least with Nora, we had resources and information and a plan. My dad's shoulders dropped and he slowly pulled the gun from his waistband. He handed it to Nora grip first, and she secured it in a lockbox in her trunk. The safe house turned out to be a motel room that smelled like cigarettes and cleaning chemicals. Bars covered the windows and the view showed a dumpster and a brick wall. Nora explained the rules while we stood in the doorway with our bags. We couldn't use our phones or contact anyone we knew or leave without her approval. She would be in the connecting room with the door cracked open. If we needed anything, we knocked on the connecting door. We didn't go outside. She asked if we understood, and we all nodded. My dad asked about food, and she said she'd order delivery, but we had to stay away from the windows when it arrived. She handed my mom a burner phone with only her number programmed in. Then she went into the connecting room and I heard the lock click. I looked around at the dingy furniture and stained carpet and realized this was my life now. No home, no friends, no identity, just a motel room with bars on the windows and a federal agent guarding the door. That night, I couldn't sleep on the scratchy bedspread that smelled